that was the most interesting part of the paddle today. I only had maybe a mile and a half on the lake, on Lake Moultrie. Got to the lock, and I thought I was going to be the only person in it, and they had a sign saying motor boats only, but after telling what I was doing, they made an exception for me. The lock was very, very interesting. I'd never been in a lock before, didn't even know quite how it worked, and didn't know what to expect, and I found that to be very, very interesting, and asked the operator a lot of questions, and she was very helpful. And then once I got out of the lock, I was just coming down the Tail Race Canal to this point here. It's about 4 miles, and thanks for lunch, by the way. And here we are in Monk's Corner, sitting in the shade.
And we're sitting here with Willard Strong of, is that correct?
That's right.
Of Santee Cooper, and introduce yourself and give us your title here.
Okay, Patrick, I'm Willard Strong, and I'm a publication specialist with Santee Cooper here at our corporate headquarters in Monk's Corner, which is right beside where we are at the old Santee Canal Park.
Tell us about some of the history and the industry that Richard would have been paddling by on his experience here at the lakes.
Well, from where he came through was the centerpiece of what was the original Santee Cooper hydroelectric and navigation project that was built between 1939 and 1942, and that was the largest land clearing and earth moving project in the history of the United States. Employed nearly 13,000 people during that time period, most of them from the relief rolls of the state, which was still recovering from the Great Depression, of course, which began after the stock market crash in October 1929. And what the project did was, again, connect the Santee and the Cooper rivers for a hydroelectric project that Richard came through, and that was the centerpiece of our generation of the state-owned electric and water utility, which is Santee Cooper, and that's so named for the two rivers that the project created by damming up the Santee River, and water goes through a diversion canal about 8 miles long that Richard went through earlier, and you come down into Lake Moultrie, which is about 60,000 acres, about 12.5 miles from one end to the other to where he came up to the powerhouse and to the lock. The hydro plant is embedded in the lock, and there are 5 hydroelectric generators in there that produce about 128 megawatts of power. A tremendous amount of power at the time when it came online in February 17, 1942. He came down 4 miles here to a point called Stony Landing, and it is part of the canal park. It's named for the limestone outcroppings, or stony outcroppings that are comprise bluffs that we have. This is a kind of a high area. We are in the low country, but there are areas like this, and of course when it was settled, people chose the high ground to build their houses on, and right here we have that with the Stony Landing house, built in 1843 or so by Charleston merchant John Dawson. But there have been people settled here beginning in the 1740s. So this was a very active area because of its natural history, because it's high ground, because it has a place that you want to get away from a lot of mosquitoes around here, which malaria was a very, very big problem, here in South Carolina until we got our arms around that.
I was actually talking to somebody up at Santee State Park about that was another factor. It's probably a smaller one.
Yeah.
In the creation of the Santee Cooper project,
right,
was to help with the malaria problem. It's flooding a lot of the swamps into lakes. That's where
right,
there wasn't a big mosquito problem.
That was another thing that helped move the project along. Malaria killed people in South Carolina on a regular basis because of mosquitoes in the 1930s, and it was, I remember seeing an old poster that malaria, the scourge of the South, and try not to be bitten by mosquitoes. You can probably tell us a lot about that on your on your trip. And fortunately now malaria is not the issue that it was. A lot of these diseases we may have thought were eradicated are kind of making a comeback, but but we understand now that mosquitoes cause the disease, and it was thought in in colonial times and antebellum times, they didn't know that mosquitoes cause malaria, and people sought to build summer homes away from like Charleston area, and they had towns, Somerville, Somerton, Pinopolis, Somerton. All of these are inland pineland villages. They thought being around the pine trees, particularly breathing the vapors around the pine trees was helpful, when actually it was just being on higher soil away from the mosquitoes and being bitten by them.